some folks to die.
By these 50 countries, differing so much in race and religion, in language and culture.
It is a big idea, a new world order.
Well, I know they're lying. They tricked me once, but they're not going to trick me twice. The time is now. Good evening and welcome back to the Professor Penn podcast. This is David Penn, your host. Glad to be with you this evening. A very special podcast. We have in studio making a second appearance, Representative Walter Hudson. Walter, welcome. So glad that you're here.
Glad to be back in these palatial studios.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's free people. That's what it's all about.
Yep.
But not to get too happy and smiley, because before we get into enjoying each other's company, we're still so close to the assassinations of your colleagues. And I watched everything on X and read and kept up with it, but I haven't had an opportunity to really talk with someone who was at the epicenter of this thing. And there's so many implications to this, and there's a lot of discussion to have here about this. And I just wanted to open up the podcast for you to go as long as you want. And I mean, if it ends up being a political conversation, great. If it ends up being a psychological conversation, great. But what was this about for you, and what are your impressions, and what would you like the people who are going to be listening to gain from this? I mean, this is a very public act that took place. So I'm just going to quiet down and let you take the ball and run with it as long as you want to.
Well, as somebody who has been in both an observer of and a participant in political activism for many, many years, one of the things that I've come to understand is that there's a certain degree of entertainment that is involved. Like a lot of people, their fun is paying attention to what's going on in politics. And so if that's the approach that you're coming at your observation of the daily news from, if you're detached personally from the actual impact of something like this when it happens, it's easy to take a very different kind of view of it than if you're, as you say, at the epicenter. Now, I'm at the epicenter relative to the guy on the street, but there are other folks who are much more in the actual epicenter of what was going on here with these political assassinations. And the reason why I start off saying it that way is because I think it really does make a difference. A lot of the conversation that's taken place, particularly online in the wake of this tragedy, has been less than gracious. And I've noticed this impulse to double down and be frankly mean about it, which I refuse to participate in. Because I think what happens is we often mistake conviction for vitriol. And so the assessment is, if you give any quarter, if you show any grace, then you're not a fighter. But people are dead. People who I worked with, family members, another colleague and his wife were shot and are still in the hospital. All of my colleagues feel very vulnerable right now. And it's not just legislators, it's staff, it's lobbyists, it's people who come down to the Capitol either to work or to participate in the process. Everybody feels vulnerable right now. And so the idea that now is the time to be even meaner, right, is something that I fundamentally reject. Now, there does come a point past which we're going to have to get back down to the business of fighting for what we believe in, and that will happen. But I think what happens in the wake of something like this is there's going to be some degree of reevaluation of what that should look like, where the boundaries of it are. In the House, when we're in a committee or we're on the House floor, we have rules regarding debate. And one of those rules is you speak to the policy, not the person. So you don't go off about how terrible Representative so-and-so is. You go after what they're proposing. You go after the policy. The policy is abhorrent. This bill does terrible things. You're not saying that the person who authored it is X, Y, or Z.
You're saying that's part of the culture of the institution.
It's part of the culture of the institution, and I think it's that rule serves to facilitate productive debate, but it also emerges from a more fundamental principle, which is frankly logic, right? Because there's this thing called ad hominem, right? Where you say, well, your idea is terrible, not because of the merits of the idea, but because it's coming from you, right? Which
There's quite a bit of that on social media,
Yes.
unfortunately.
And that's a logical fallacy. And then in this environment where you're seeing these acts of political violence, there is a important conversation to be had about dehumanizing people. And I've had a number of conversations with several different media outlets over the past couple of weeks about this question. And they ask, why does this dehumanization happen? Why do people get so angry? Excuse me. And the explanation that I've come up with, or that comes to mind, is that the political spectrum has broadened at this point in history. You go back to like the 1960s where you had JFK, you had Nixon. The Venn diagram of what the two of them believed had much more overlap, I believe, than the Venn diagram has today between the two sides. And because that spectrum is so broad, you've got Zohan Memdari over here in New York, who's just openly saying, I want to seize the means of production, right? And then you've got whoever's over on this other end of the spectrum, pick a name. They are so far apart in terms of what they believe that each one can't fathom how the other person believes what they believe. And because they can't fathom what the other person, how they got there, the assumption is, well, there must be something wrong with that person. There's a moral deficiency with that person. And once you entertain that, it's a very easy leap to go from, well, they're less than, they're less worthy, they're deserving of some form of punishment simply for believing what it is that they believe. And when a Looney Tune gets hold of that notion, that's when they feel justified to go and take an action like what we saw in the last couple of weeks. And so I think political leaders and commentators, the media, everybody, all of us have a responsibility to separate our evaluation of ideas from our evaluation of people's worth. Because if we fail to do that, then things are only going to continue to get worse. And this is one extreme, a political assassination, but of course we've seen other examples. The riots in the street, burning down of cities, destruction of property, vandalism of Teslas, right? None of which is acceptable. And we look at it from our immediate instinct is to say, we just need to punish these people for doing these things, which I agree with. You commit a crime, you should be punished. But the punishment doesn't address the underlying why of like, why are we at this point where people feel justified in doing these insane things? And I think it does go back to that. Our conversation has gotten to the point where it's you're good or you're evil, rather than this idea is good and this idea is evil. Because if you make it about the ideas instead of the people, then it gives you an opportunity to invite people into the good as opposed to casting them out because they were associated with the bad, if that makes any sense.
You know, the demonization issue was something we talked about on a previous podcast last week. It's part of propaganda. Demonization is a big part of the propagandic process. And of course, X and the social media platforms are very propagandized. And I said, my role is, tangential to what you're doing. You're there. But I right away started to modify words I was using because it's very easy to fall into the use of words that are not meant to be divisive, or it's just parlance, right? And I think that's what brought this meeting together. We were online and somebody was criticizing you about something that you had said, and he had asked me to bring that up. And I'll bring it up, but I mean, I'm already going to say in your defense, when you're posting, multiple times a day and you have a life and your kids are pulling on your pants legs and you're driving to the store and, the amount of time you spend editing these posts uh, is significant, and it's still easy to fall into the use of words that can be taken in used in a way that say, well, you're really contributing, to this problem. Now, actually, the fact that you and I sit here and speak to each other, I mean, I think in a fairly respectful and elevated way, because we both know we don't agree about everything, but we agree about a lot. But I mean, I don't jump all over the top of you every time I disagree with something you say, and I'm going to tell you why I feel this way. You're a young man, and you're developing your political persona, and no different than Royce White or any other young politician, you have the right to experiment with public-facing expressions of how you feel to try to understand your constituents. And I honor that. I think that's good. I mean, if you were perfect, well, you wouldn't be Walter Hudson, right? So, but I did, what brought us together was that comment from that Bob Dobolino, who has been brutal to me. I mean, just brutal to me. But what was interesting was I had an actually fairly sophisticated and non-conflict oriented interaction with him around that time. And I thought that was progress. And I had previously asked him to meet with me, like you went and met with Mike Norton, which I thought was great. Because ultimately, when we start talking about polarization in our society, when it's all over, we ever come to through this period of time, these are American citizens that I want to be in community with. I am not an absolutist that wants this to be, like some kind of, well, I don't know what people are thinking. It's not a war. We're not at war. It's a discussion of ideas with the hope that through the discussion, we'll come up with better policy, better ideas that make for a more well-being society. So I listen to the voices of the left. I've listened to all the voices and try to learn from them. And I think that's what you're saying. When it goes ad hominem, when it becomes a personal issue, we lose the ability to listen to each other. So I'm trying to listen to everybody. And I think I'm doing a pretty good job of it. I mean, I don't block anybody on X. I let people ride the hell out of me. It doesn't bother me. I like it. I want people, when we suppress people, they become dark, So the thing that I wanted to share and talk to you about in relative to this, well, first of all, just the sheer loss of this for the community. Let's just be frank about it. Frank. Like you said, you just said it in a very kind way. For the majority of people that are doing politics as entertainment, they didn't have any real visceral emotional reaction to the deaths of these people because we just quite frankly become desensitized to death because we live in a culture of death. I mean, we're constantly at war. We have public policy. I mean, I don't want to get into it to the point where we go down the rabbit hole, but we're not living in a culture of life, and we have death constantly reflected to us, political violence like these riots, it's constant. So people are desensitized. That was not your experience. You must have gone, whoa, that must have just grabbed you when that happened because it was somebody that you knew. I assume you knew Melissa Hartman.
Yeah. No, I mean, so the personal, I'll take you through the personal ride. of the immediate hours and days and the past couple of weeks. So I wake up that Saturday morning, get woken up by my wife, who tells me, I mean, this is the first thing you hear as you're opening your eyes,
Good
right?
morning, honey.
Yeah, right. And you have to remember, in that moment, we didn't have any of the context. So we didn't know who this guy was. We didn't have any sense of what the motivation was or who was being targeted. All we knew was 2 legislators had been attacked and the Speaker Emerita and her husband had been murdered. That's all we knew. And so how do you process that? I think the immediate assumption amongst all of my colleagues was, you have to assume that you're being targeted. And so it's contacting law enforcement, it's ensuring that there's extra patrols, it's making sure you have your home set up in such a way as that you can respond if there is a threat, making sure the cameras have batteries in them, that sort of thing. And then as the details rolled out and it became more apparent that the list of folks who were being targeted were either Democrats or were in some way associated with the abortion industry, as a Republican, as a conservative, you had a certain degree of, not a sense of safety, but certainly an acknowledgement that you're less likely to be one of the people who's being attacked.
You weren't on that list.
Correct, but you also, you can't assume that, "Oh, okay, then everything's fine now." Remember, this guy was running around for 43 hours before they finally caught up with him. And it was a really strange way, and there continues to be, to my mind, a lot of very legitimate questions about how this all went down. It's like the more we learned about it, the weirder it got. Finding out that, in point of fact, he didn't just go to 2 legislators' homes, he went to 4 legislators' homes. The first one apparently was the Hoffmans, and then there were 2 others that they weren't home. At the third one, as I understand it, because he was dressed sorta like a police officer. He had a squad car that was, they refer to it as a squad car, but if you've seen the pictures, really doesn't look like an official squad car. I mean, like, really rinky-dink, fake police license plate, a logo on the side that is not an agency logo, but he had a light bar, and it was a black vehicle. So he's encountered by a police officer in a squad responding to the legislator's home, doing a welfare check. And this guy's sitting on the street, on the curb, and this cop comes by and does one of those window-to-window things, apparently, and tries to engage with him. He ignores her and just looks straight ahead, and so she just, like, drives away, apparently. And then he goes from there to the Hortmans, where he murders them. That's crazy to me. I don't understand how that happens. How do you not recognize that this isn't an actual legitimate police vehicle? How are you not calling into, because even if you think it's an actual law enforcement vehicle, you certainly recognize that it's not part of your agency, right?
Do you expect that there's going to be hearings about this in the legislature when you return?
We'll see.
Because you're bringing up issues of policing, police training.
Yeah.
And I mean, these are significant issues. I had not heard this, and I have to be frank about it. When I read things, I'm becoming very intense about this. I want to look at court documents. I mean, I still have faith in our legal system. And when evidence is entered into the court record, that's, to me, better than media. And there's so many allegations. When I looked at all this stuff going on X, I said, I don't know. I don't even want to know what you people think. They didn't even catch the perpetrator, and people already had theories about what was going on.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's, to me, is just not helpful.
No, I 100% agree. And I don't want to foster more theories by asking these questions, but the questions are legitimate and they should be asked.
Well, for an elected representative, this affected your body.
Mhm.
I mean, if these are real issues, I mean, there should be, I don't want to use the word should. I would like it as a citizen if this kind of thing was publicly investigated and we as citizens better understood, because we're living in an era of conspiracy theories
Yeah.
and, I want to, on the podcast, if you ever watch my podcast, I constantly talk about not that I know the truth, but I'm searching for it. And one of the things that helps us get closer to the truth, because the truth, we can't achieve truth, but searching to get there, it dispels conspiracy theories. And I think still to this day, there's a lot of this going on. But interestingly, with the news cycle, we're on to the next big thing, except for the people who had that tragic loss.
Yes.
And so I look at the folks really on my side of the football, and I saw Melissa Hortman's positions explicated. She's still a human being, and she's an American citizen, and she has the right through our process to hold those views. Certainly should not be a death sentence.
Correct.
And having lost people that are close to me, there's a real grieving process going on for people. And there's just a lack of respect, a coarseness that has grown into our society because we don't live in traditional culture anymore. We're living in postmodern culture. And compared to the culture I grew up in, it's coarse. It's very coarse. So we've moved on. There's not that much. Funerals are over. I mean, you don't even see anything about it on X anymore. It's been replaced by the soup du jour, so to speak. But the underlying issue of why, both legally, historically, politically, the mechanism of why is unanswered. And then there's a kind of spiritual or kind of a nonlinear why that I wanted to talk to you about. Because the part of this thing that disturbed me, and I haven't talked much about it, and I want to talk about it with you because you can come back on me. I mean, I held back on this. I actually wanted to post up about it the day of the funeral. And I thought, well, that would be crude. I'm not going to do that. And then the next day I had a guest appearance on Real America's Voice, and I talked about it. And here's what I said. And we're going to get into the pith of you and me now, so I'm looking forward to this. But, I mean this with respect. I'll name names if we get to it, but I'll try to stay away from the names. There was prominent people that took these awful deaths, and they said, well, we have to respect this. And there was this process of kind of emotional sensitivity that was mirrored or expressed. But really the bottom line of what people were saying was, we have to cooperate, communicate. We're better than this. And I felt like there was a push for a more bipartisan effort, as you were alluding to earlier. Eventually, we're going to have to get back to dealing with the division between these two groups of people. But I didn't like that, and I'm going to share with you why. These people died. Mourn them, grieve them, don't use their deaths. So you can't say don't use their deaths and then use them at the same time. I mean, this is me as a citizen going, these people died a horrible, horrible, violent death. Let's just bury them and love each other in the community. And I didn't like the push for we're better than this, because obviously we're not better than this. This is what we've generated. And the question then becomes, beyond the political, beyond the legal, why did this happen? And I'm heading someplace with this. You were talking about these Venn diagrams being farther apart than ever. And I agree with you on the extremes. But in the center, there is broad bipartisan agreement about the most important issues of the day. And I don't know that that's necessarily true in the state legislatures, but at the federal level, we do have broad bipartisan agreement about very important issues. Military expenditures and medical expenditures, the $4 trillion between the research and when you add it all up together, our budget reflects what we agree about, and there has been a constancy for a long period of time about certain issues. And those certain issues are the center of our politics. And I think why you're starting to see my theory of the case, why we're starting to see more political violence is within that center, it's breeding extremism. I don't know if I'm making myself understandable, but that broad bipartisan agreement at the center is creating extremism on both ends because people are not served well by that broad bipartisan agreement. And I think, and going back to our underlying discourse, which we haven't really broken out into, intensity, I think you're seeing when people pick on you, which they do, and you see it, I think what you're seeing is this growing discontent with broad bipartisan agreement. I do agree with you at the extremes. It's more extreme than ever before. But I think that that extremism is driven by what we all agree about. And that's what we're not talking about. That's what I'm trying to talk about on my podcast. I know that's what Royce is trying to talk about. And the conversation is changing because people are starting to say, what are we doing in the center? And I am trying to say to you, as a fellow citizen, let us look at the center and see what is that doing to. And we don't even know what drove this guy. That's another thing. The theory is that what drove him. I mean, I have no idea what drove him. He could have been a Mad Hatter.
Mm-hmm.
He could have been a very cold and calculating political assassin. We don't know. I mean, there's no real knowledge of what drove him behaviorally to do this. Do we know anything about that yet? I don't think so. Is there presumptions?
Well, there are theories, right, based upon the list of targets and things that he said. But a guy like this, you can't take what he's saying at face value. I mean, again, going back to the questions that I have about how this all unfolded. So you've got that police encounter, and then you've got the fact that he escaped on foot from the Hortmans out the back and apparently somehow made it back to Minneapolis. What, with no vehicle? Like, did he have help? He's going back and forth between two places where he's known to reside, doesn't get intercepted at either of those places. He's running around looking for money. He was apparently trying to retrieve $10K from his residence in Green Isle. Well, I mean, why wouldn't you, like, if you had an escape plan, wouldn't you have set that up prior rather than trying to figure it out after? And then his wife and family members getting pulled over and they've got passports and $20K in the car and cash. And this guy works as a 7-Eleven manager and for funeral homes, but somehow has a $500,000 house paid off, 3 different cars, tons of expensive firearms and ammunition, travels across the world intercontinentally, and has 2 places of residence where he's paying rent at one. Where's this money coming from? How's he got tens of thousands of dollars of cash? None of this makes any sense, and it raises a lot of questions. So, asking what his motivation was is almost like the least interesting question as to how this panned out. I mean, this is absolutely nuts. But to your point that you were making earlier, I actually appreciate the fact that because that is another dimension of it. So I talk about the breadth of the political spectrum, right? What you're talking about, and I agree, and I used this analogy yesterday when I was talking on another program. There's a bell curve there of where people are at on that spectrum. And I agree with you that it is a bell curve, that most people are somewhere in that middle between those extremes. And what's interesting, and I wasn't following you at first when you were talking about this, but I think I got it eventually, which is what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the status quo that is upheld by that center is not serving people, and that's causing more extremism. Perhaps that is the cause of the expansion on one side or the other of the political spectrum, because both sides, and this takes me back to like Tea Party days, right? Because we had the Tea Party and then we had Occupy Wall Street. And they were both reacting to the exact same thing. Bailouts, right? The sense that the average guy isn't being served, the system is broken, it's not working for us. But their solutions were on two totally different ends of the spectrum. And that same phenomenon persists today by other names in other forms, MAGA, whatever you want to call it, where it's everybody recognizes the problem, the central problem, but they have very, very different given solutions. Again,
Let me just, yes, you got it. I'm glad because I question my own ability to express that, and I'm probably somewhat trepidatious about expressing it because what I'm saying is the very center of our culture is now creating so much unwellness socially and physically that it's going to breed extremism. But I'm not so sure about what you just said about, for example, MAGA. You brought up MAGA.
Mhm.
Is MAGA in the center or is it in the extreme? I mean, I think MAGA, we have a president who's MAGA. So isn't MAGA really in that center bell curve from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's closer to that bell curve than it is to the extreme. I brought up MAGA in association with the Tea Party because I think the Tea Party became MAGA over time. Because what the Tea Party was going for, fiscal responsibility, constitutionally limited government, free markets, MAGA is not that, but there is a Venn diagram there. And MAGA became the workable version of that. Like the Tea Party as it was in 2010 was never going to be a thing that persisted. MAGA, a derivative of it, is something that has persisted and can continue to persist because it's predicated upon principles that have been refined. For instance, the Tea Party, if you went into a Tea Party in 2010 talking about tariffs, you'd have been called a Marxist and kicked out of the room, right? Today, we embrace tariffs as a tool to be used for the benefit of the American people. And the difference between those two viewpoints is a level of sophistication. So I think the Tea Party back in the day was much more analogous to like the Libertarian Party, which deals in academic principle, but doesn't know how to apply it in the real world.
It may not even be possible to apply.
Right. Whereas the MAGA take on tariffs says, yeah, that's cute, but here's the real world context. We have antagonistic economies that are trying to harm us economically, and tariffs are a tool, just like your concealed carry is a tool. You don't pull it out all the time or wield it recklessly, but you can use that tool for a purpose in order to affect balance in terms of trade. And that's what MAGA has come to prescribe. That nuance never would have been accepted back during the Tea Party days.
Well, this is fruitful because what we're talking about is political evolution, where ideas that are on the fringe move into that center of that bell curve. And I'm just going to make it very simple for everybody. From my perspective, as somebody who has traded internationally, these tariffs are not going to change the volume of international trade except for 5 sectors. There are 5 sectors that are going to be brought back into the country. And, President Biden brought one of those sectors back with the CHIPS Act. So we've got semiconductors, we've got pharma, we got automobiles, we've got shipbuilding. There are sectors that are coming back into this country because of very high tariffs and public policy. Steel and aluminum being the 5th one. Those industries are coming back. Tariffs are being used. Tax rates are being used in those industries to repatriate those industries. But it's way more than jobs. It's about, national sovereignty and independence and military reasons. Steel and aluminum, you can't make your own steel. You're not in the military business. Shipbuilding. The Chinese turned out more ships last year than the United States have turned out since 1946. That kind of thing. You know, we're trying to, those are strategic industries. The rest of it, and you know, I watch the left. I watch it in Minnesota because we're in a, you know, really have a strong leftist media here in the Twin Cities. I read the Tribune every day, Star Tribune. You know, we're $37 trillion in debt. You can pick your additional tax. You can raise income taxes. You can have a VAT tax. You can raise a national sales tax. But when you're $37 trillion in debt, you have to increase taxes. So tariffs are about taxes. Now, people don't like taxes, but, you know, we enjoyed that $37 trillion running the bill up.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's time, you know, the bill's coming due. Time to pay the piper. So why can't we talk about that honestly? You know, we just need to be honest about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I want my legislators to just say, hey, did you all enjoy that party? It's time to clean up the mess. You know, we have to clean up this mess. Or if we don't clean it up, the implications are quite dire for the country. So it's almost like something like, let's just get that into the center of the curve, and let's just agree that if you spend, you have to pay. You have to pay for it. And that, even that is not yet dealt with. Although I have to say, in that last session, there seemed to be some effort. And I know that there was many voices that pilloried the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
I read them. There was an effort to be fiscally responsible. I thought that was great. You know, you got to start somewhere. You just can't fix things. People want a fix overnight. I get it. And, you know, if I was left to my own devices, I could be a critic too and say, couldn't you go even further? Well, that's why we have the podcast. And I do want to say for the viewers and listeners, Walter's in here. We get along. I think we like each other. We don't have to agree about everything. When I do my podcast, that's me being a personality. When I have a guest here, this is me being an interviewer. So I try to leave out, unless we get really into a tough spot, I try to leave my bag at the door, and I want to hear what you have to say. So from a financial, fiscal, budgetary perspective, and we can come back to those assassinations at any time that it's appropriate in the rest of the podcast. How did you feel about how that turned out? What was your view of it when it was all said and done? Were you proud of the work that was done? Do you think it was sufficient? Could it have been more? How do we interpret Walter Hudson? I would like to hear Walter Hudson's review of the effort. If I'm putting you on the spot, just move on.
No. I mean, I should be able to answer that question.
Well,
right?
I hope so.
I've had some time to think about it.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'll start with the good, right? So, largest cut to state budget in history. Of course, the counterpoint to that is there's an endpoint fallacy there, right? Of like, well, where are you measuring a cut from? We were able to roll back a lot of the funding for these unaccountable nonprofits. We were able to provide some flexibility to school districts to help them out with their financial woes that they inexplicably, there actually is an explanation, but seemingly inexplicably have after historic funding under the trifecta of 23 and 24. We were able to defend religious freedoms and push back against a lot of the things that the Democrats told us they would have done if we weren't there to stop them. So there are a lot of good things in that regard. I was frustrated a little bit by the process because there wasn't a whole lot of broad conversation amongst the rank and file about what the goal was going to be financially. It was just kind of rolled out. All right, here's our budget targets. And everybody's looking at each other like, what? Okay, I guess those are our budget. Like there wasn't a conversation about it. It was just between the negotiations between leadership and the governor, here we go. This is what we're doing. And I guess that's the way the process works. But it was frustrating. And so when people say, well, you could have cut more. Yeah, sure. I assume we could have. I don't know why we couldn't, because I wasn't in the room where that determination was made. But certainly when you're dealing with a tied house where there are, the Democrats want to pull in the spending direction and we want to pull in the not spending direction, and the Senate is controlled by the Democrats and you got Governor Walz, the fact that we were able to make any progress whatsoever is pretty remarkable. So, am I satisfied? No. Am I happy that we went in the direction we did? Absolutely.
Do you, I think for the grassroots Republicans, I think they're looking at the total process going back to the beginning of the session and saying, well, this could have been done differently.
Mhm.
This could have been done different. And I have to say, I would, but I'm not there. I mean, unlike a lot of the other people that are critical, and Julia Coleman stood me up one day and say, "Hey, tell me you've never been elected." And I came back to her. I retorted and I said, I don't have to be elected to know how the cow chews the cud, and that's true. I mean, but that doesn't mean that the way I would do things would be successful. You can't, uh, you can't presume that your strategy will work when there's dozens of members and if you don't have the constituency to get anything done, and you said this the last time you were on. If you don't have any constituency, you can't get anything done. So,
Right.
although I would have preferred a more robust effort, I'm willing to say I don't understand the process. I'm not down there like you are every day. And if you're saying what I'm hearing you say is you would have liked it to be more, but what was done was a step or movement in the right, could have been a lot worse, is what you're saying.
Yes, which I know, and I know from years and years and years of being an activist and being on the outside looking in, that nobody is ever going to be satisfied with that point. It could have been worse is not a satisfying thing to hear, but it is true. Like, it is factually correct that it absolutely would have been very much worse if there was one more Democrat elected in the House of Representatives. If they had the majority, they would have raised taxes, they would have spent more, they would have given more away to their nonprofit industrial complex that has fostered all of this fraud, and there would be no fraud committee. There would be no public questions being asked about a lot of this corruption that seems to be simmering just beneath the surface of the current political infrastructure here in the state of Minnesota. And so, and likewise, that works the other way too. If we had one more Republican, then we could have taken an axe to the root, right? Still be dealing with Democrats in the Senate and Walls, but obviously you have more power. It's a numbers game. And this is what I think. This is the great irony, I think, on our side, on the conservative side of the conversation, is we cloak ourselves in the Constitution and we're reverent of the founders and the founding and the principles of the constitutional republic. But then for some reason, we expect when we elect somebody that they're going to behave as if they're the king. Well, why didn't you just do X, Y, and Z? And it's like, well, because I'm one of 134 representatives, the majority of which need to vote on something in order for it to pass. And then it needs to go to the Senate. And sometimes they might amend it. And then it comes back. And then you have conference committees. And then you got to talk to the governor. Like, it is a process that is a constitutional process. You don't have to like the people who were elected to these roles, but they were elected, and that's what you've got to work with. And so I find it ironic that as conservatives, we seem to expect the type of an outcome that you could only get under a monarchy from a system that is designed to be incremental and collaborative and force compromise. That's the way the system has been designed.
I think the place we're at, and I could be, I'm going to say this is the search for truth. I think what I'm seeing and what I'm feeling is, and of course this would be an experiment that could have a big flop, but I think the presumption is that if there was a more robust effort
Mhm.
on the part of MNGOP and on the part of the elected representatives to mirror a political ideology which is clearly in control of Washington. Clearly, there is a big sea change at the federal level, giant. That sea change is really not going on here in Minnesota politically. And we're having this fight in the party, which is, the two camps are going at each other hammer and tong. And I know that the camp that I'm most aligned with would say, we don't know the depth and breadth of the support that we could gain if we took a more robust approach to our politics and were less collaborative, which then ties right into this political assassination, actually, because then they say, well, we have to be careful about this. We're in some uncharted. We're past the point we've never had this kind of thing happen, and we're in a point where we really can't predict the future because that's never happened before. This kind of political thing here in Minnesota, these assassinations. But I think the stridency is the belief that we could get much farther by being much more full-throated in our defense, or even the word defense is kind of a funny word now, right? But in our pursuit of traditional republicanism. And I think that for me, I think there's a lot of, I was just looking at Dustin Grady posting yesterday. Somebody said we should start a third party. And he said, no, that's not effective. Let's go after soft Republicans. Well, who's going to define what that is? What is a soft Republican? We have a lot of unknowns in here. And what we don't have is a party with a ideological focus that enough Republicans can agree about that we can work together. We clearly have a very large part of the Republican population that is being pushed aside by the traditional. And I don't like that. I don't feel the tent is being expanded to let in the number, or shall I say, political ideology. A perfect example is Israel. Israel, perfect example. Israel, the defense of Israel is core for many Minnesota Republicans, and particularly the Christian evangelical base, which is aligned with the Republican Party. But the MAGA Republicans in Minnesota are questioning the support of Israel, the endless war. We have a new cleave in the party that is really much more daunting than any of the previous ones that we've already experienced. Compared to tariffs, Israel is a much more potent issue. Compared to the Ukraine, war in the Ukraine.
Yeah.
Israel is a much more potent issue. And I'm watching this now, and it really has the potential to damage the Republican movement here in Minnesota, because these become almost irreconcilable issues. Not that they are irreconcilable, it's that the judgments around religion and faith are so hardwired that now we go to the ad hominem part of it. Why do you feel this way? Well, because it's in the Bible. As soon as we default into that, we've left the political, we've gone to religious, and it's very difficult to talk to people. And so now we're getting stridency that I've never seen before. And this is a problem for Minnesota Republicans. Remembering that the party tells me that there's a large percentage of Christians that don't vote. We need to go get them and get them to vote. So this is a policy problem. It's a social solidarity problem. It's an elective politics problem. Has the party been thinking about this at all? I mean, is there any conversation with you and your colleagues about this growing, really serious issue that is now afflicting us here in Minnesota?
Well, specifically as it relates to Israel and foreign affairs, there isn't a whole lot of conversation that we have at the state level about those types of policies, outside of, having lunch conversation.
But but you will agree with, do you agree with me that it's a potential electoral issue?
I do, but I have to confess that I don't quite understand why. Like, this really kind of fascinates me, this debate, and I wonder to what extent it's performative on either side. So, like, for instance, when Tucker sat down with Ted Cruz and they got into it, it it just seemed like it seemed really performative on both sides. Cruz has got to do his whole religious Bible thing, and Tucker's got to do his whole contrarian isolationist thing. And there wasn't really a conversation that was being had there. In my perception, Trump hit the bullseye. He did exactly what he should do as an American president looking out for America's interests. That was an America first response. The fallacy that I see on the one side of the debate is the idea that if an action taken by the United States military benefits a foreign country, that is inherently not America first. And what that does is it ignores the very real possibility and likelihood even that a foreign nation like Israel's interests can in fact be aligned with our interests. We can both have the same problem or similar threats. We keep talking about Venn diagrams. And the other side, like the Cruz side, their fallacy is that we have to take personal responsibility for all this. Like we have to own it. We have to be the ones who make it work. And what Trump said is no to both, and said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go defend our interests by making sure that this very real, potentially imminent threat of a crazy, theocratic, totalitarian, aggressive, death to America regime developing a nuclear weapon, which they're crazy enough to use and can be used against us and our troops and interfere with our commerce and a million other things, could be smuggled into our country and detonated. I'm going to set their nuclear program back to the Stone Age. And then I'm out. Clean hands. Done. You guys figure it out. And you better behave, right? We're going to have a ceasefire. I mean, that's perfect. And I don't understand why either side of that debate has a problem with that, because you both got what you wanted. In effect, you don't have the forever wars for these folks over here. Awesome. And we defended our shared interests with our ally Israel. So you got what you want. Who's the loser in this? I don't understand why it's creating the divide that it is.
Well, I think this is going to be great. I mean, we might be here for 3 more hours because of this, it's the off season now. And I think that as I watch your career, I think it's possible you could be in Washington someday. I do believe that about you. That's why I like keeping my relationship with you, going and keeping the level of discourse high. I don't get into the ad hominem stuff. I don't think it's helpful when other people do it. I think it is about the ideas. And you're bringing up, I really don't get this. Well, I've been thinking about this my entire life because I grew up with this. And I realize at this point in my life, and I've realized for a long time, the power of the Jewish lobby in the United States because I've been involved with it for my entire life. I mean, I've seen it function. And I do know how powerful AIPAC is, and Norm Coleman from our state runs the RJC. Mark Miller, who runs the local chapter, he frequently appears at Republican Party events. The Republican Party is frequently taking votes in support of Israel, as if what MNGOP does has anything to do with foreign policy. It has nothing to do with that. This is about elective policy. It's about elections here in Minnesota. So we got these. Let's leave the leftists out of it. I would say the left is almost hegemonically anti-Israel with a very powerful growing anti-Semitism. I mean, so we'll just leave that out there. And, going back to the center, creating extremism, I mean, that extremism is born of a policy. I don't know what year you were born, but I remember with the great glee I had in 1967 when Israel kicked ass in the 6-Day War. I remember it. I mean, it was powerful. I remember the 73 War. I mean, I know these things. I have people that live in Israel that are my relatives. I felt guilty not being in Israel for most of my adult life because my cousins are in the Army, and I'm over here, living the life of luxury here in the United States of America. And I mean, I grew up with these people. So I think I understand it now because a little bit better, and I'm a little bit afraid to talk about it because it's a quagmire of religious belief mixed with politics. So when you mix religion and politics, you leave that debate and you go to the ad hominem because now we're talking about matters of faith.
Mm-hmm.
So for the Jewish community, it's hegemonically supportive of Israel in the Republican Party, for sure. Now there's Jews on the left side that are anti support of Israel. There is some Jewish people on the right side of the football, I would be one of them, that question the ongoing support and what is going on in the Middle East, which has gone back since 2003. It is a forever war over there. And people are starting to say, and particularly in the so-called, whatever that means, MAGA movement, no more war. We don't want to have these wars in the Middle East because they're not really defending our interests. Going back to what you said, maybe our interests and Israel's interests are aligned. Well, we don't have the time today. Maybe they're not. Maybe we're not quite sure that the interests of my country, I'm an American citizen, I'm not so sure that it benefits my family or my state to be deploying all those military resources and all that money in the Middle East. But I think the interesting and more important question in Minnesota is, because the Jewish community is so small here, it's the Christian Zionist movement that is so critical here in Minnesota about the future of the Republican Party in Minnesota. This is what I'm thinking about and frankly concerned about, because that MAGA movement really had the backing of the evangelical Christian Zionists up until right now. And now that's coming apart. So the party is fracturing. Now, I'm not saying it has to fracture. I think conversations like this could serve to weave it back together. But there is a very powerful, right here in this town, you know it, throughout the state, the Christian Zionism is very strong. What does that even mean? Well, that's a religious movement. That's not a political sensitivity. That is a religious belief that supporting Israel will hasten the return of the Messiah. We've left the here and now of the political, and we've moved into the other world where people are living. And I'm not here to judge anybody's faith or what they believe, but it does make for a very difficult conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And on the Jewish side of the equation, same thing's functioning. That's the Holy Land of Israel. The fact that Israel was started by Marxists that didn't believe in God, nobody remembers that. I mean, it's the homeland of the Jews, and the Jews being some kind of faithful people, and we miss the fact that about half the people in the country can't wait to get rid of Netanyahu, and they're not faithful at all. They're secular humanists, no different than the left here in this country. Mm-hmm. They'd get along great with Bob Dubalina. They'd be great with them. So we have this problem. It is not a esoteric foreign policy issue. It's an elective politics issue right here in Minnesota. And it speaks to your constituency. It speaks to the next cycle. How are these different groups going to vote? Because the MAGA movement is not going to get off no more foreign wars. It's not, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And rightfully so. Right? I mean, and again, this is why I don't understand why it has to be a conflict. Now you bring up
Could I give you food for thought? Because
Sure.
this is what's been rolling around in my head, and maybe.
Are you mic'd up?
I am.
Good for you. Tanner, good morning.
Good morning. Maybe you'll be able to clarify this because I'm still learning a lot of things, but we are their ally.
Yeah.
And so I understand, if they're attacked, we're going to be there for the defense. So let's take this back. You have a best friend. You're at a bar. You know what, friend? I have your back. Some guy comes up and starts messing with him. You're going to have his back. Now, you do that a couple of times. Now, what are you going to do if that friend starts calling you? Hey, this man's talking shit. He possibly is going to come beat your ass. I think you need to be here. I think you need to come and fight him. would you go for fight? Would you go, like, is that really in your best interest?
Or how about this? How about you're going out to the bar every week with the same guy? Because this happened to me when I was 19, 20 years old.
Okay.
It was called the Libation Station
Yeah.
on 7th Street in St. Paul.
Yeah.
And you could get into a good row there every Friday night. That's why we were going.
Yeah.
But the same guy I was going with, my friend, got in a fight every Friday night.
Yeah.
And after a certain period of time, I started to say, hey, Ricky, I love you, brother. But every Friday night, we have to go home all beat up.
Yeah.
Every Friday night. And that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's a really good analogy.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand it because when someone's your ally, is it expected that if they want to attack, you also have to be there? Is
Right.
that the responsibility that we have? So I guess I can kind of understand why there's some people who see this action and go, this is not America first. Because it wasn't like we were sitting there going, okay, we need to do this. And then we went to Israel
Sure.
and talked with them. It was more Israel came to us and asked us to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. So these are great questions. And I think what it brings to the surface is this thing called context, which is often missing from these two disparate perspectives. So, when you say MAGA's never going to get away from not wanting forever war, yeah, that's exactly right. They shouldn't want that. But there has to be some nuance in there between, like, that doesn't mean that we're never going to take any military action. That's not what that means. It means that we're going to deploy our military assets strategically, effectively, with precision in order to evade that quagmire. That's what I feel like Trump did. Now, to your point regarding, Israel being the scrappy short guy in the bar picking fights, and then you're his friend, so you got to end up defending him. Yeah, at a certain point, you have to take him aside and be like, "Listen, buddy." And Trump did that.
Yes, he did.
You know what I mean?
He did.
Yeah, that's true.
He did. And this is my point exactly. The evangelical Zionist movement is hegemonically supportive of Israel. These people could vote Republican. We know many of them don't vote Republican. They don't vote because their aspirations are in another world. I want those people to vote. I want them to understand that their will, their efforts to create a better America is part of making a better world. I want that group of people. It's a little bit Jewish, okay? We have a concept in Judaism called tikkun olam. It's the creation. It's finishing the work of creation, that God left space for our free will to make this a beautiful world. And, we're into this kind of very difficult to talk here because of the judgments, as I said, around faith. But we have a lot of Christians that could vote Republican that don't. If all the Christians that could vote Republican and don't vote it, it'd be a blowout.
100%.
A blowout. We want those people to vote. But now it's going the other direction because and I'm in this camp. I don't want to see any more wars of discretion. These are discretionary wars. They've been going on my entire adult life. I want it to stop. I want to take care of my fellow citizens. I want to take care of my state, my neighborhood. Okay, well, first of all, that makes me rather heretical in the Jewish community right off the bat. So the Jews that listen to me, I get a lot of bad feedback for that. Not that many Jewish people will say that, okay? But then I'm being contacted by Christian pastors and people in the Christian evangelical movement, and they're saying, well, you're not helping because they're hardwired faithfully to support Israel. This is something, if you're not thinking about it as a leader in the Republican caucus, we better start talking about this and figuring out how we're going to deal with this. This is not a small issue.
I have no doubt that it is a very important issue, and I don't doubt your analysis of its importance. What I will say is that in my travels politically in this state, I have not encountered what you're talking about. So I don't have conversations with people who like this. Usually people want to talk about things like, how much walls sucks and what the Democrats have done to the state and taxes. And I don't get people coming, and maybe it's because I'm at the state level rather than the federal. I don't get people coming up to me and the first thing they say is, where you at on Israel? Or it's really, really important that we back Israel. Like I'm not encountering these people who you're saying are so hegemonic and territorial about the Republican Party doing Israel things, supporting Israel. Um, so I don't doubt that it's true that that's a faction. I question, I guess, how electorally impactful it is, or how dangerous this conversation is to future electoral victory when I'm not hearing people talk about it outside of this conversation.
Well, let's see where it goes. I mean, things bubble up. I see them. I see the potential for chaos because we don't know what's going to happen next in the Middle East. I mean, the real X factor in this is Israel's running its own game. We would like to believe that they're our little buddy and they do what we tell them to do, and that's not true. If they want a war of regime change in Iran, and there are significant members of the Republican Party that want regime change. And this is where this line between state politics and federal politics gets a little murky. It's a little murky. Like, for example, Tom Emmer, did he serve in the State House here before he went on? You see? So it's kind of like the minors going to the majors. It's not really the minors, though. It's actually the center of the deal.
Yeah.
And then you get these tensions between the feds and the states, like in the Big Beautiful Bill. It has this clause in it. States cannot regulate AI for 10 years. There's an interface here between federal and state policy that we don't talk about, we're not talking about, which is one of the things I wanted to bring up. What are all of the issues that are federal issues that are also state issues? Those issues are the critical issues. What is the issue at the federal level? That's like energy policy. We've talked about it before. There are things where the state interfaces with the national government. Those are the issues that matter to me. And when I see my local Republican Party not in alignment with the president's agenda, now we have that gap that's growing. Do these people really support the president? These are issues. And if people don't support the president, I'm okay with it, but let's not wear a MAGA hat and hide it. Okay?
Sure.
I don't like, this is where I get pissed. This is the part that I really don't tolerate. If people don't support the president, okay, say it. Risk your political future. Get that red hat off your head and come out full-throated and say, I don't support him. Let's have the fight. Let's not hide, draft behind the MAGA movement, and then at the right moment, A2 Brutus and pull out that knife and start stabbing people in the back. Israel is one of those issues because we're talking about military. I think 5% of the jobs in this state are military-industrial complex related. That's a big number. And we're smalt as a state for military contracting. And still, I think about 5% of our jobs are related to that issue. It's a state issue that has federal implications. What I want to do is deal with this stuff. Like you were talking about this kind of murky NGO, industry that the Democrats have created to ply their trade here in Minnesota. Nobody talked about that 5 years ago. It existed 5 years ago.
Yes.
Right? Now we have some talk about it. Great. All right, what are we going to do in the next session to continue to push forward on that? Here's another one. Now I'm being a constituent. University of Minnesota. I mean, Marion Rarick actually went out and started to talk about there's 2,000 people that make more money there than the governor. Okay, and then President Trump is cutting research budgets. And here comes Amy Klobuchar. Oh, people are going to die from cancer. They're cutting the cancer research. Hey, I grew up at the university. Yeah, there's some medical research there, but what they're really good at researching there is how to kill people. It's a land-grant institution. And the amount of money that goes down that sinkhole, it's part of that NGO, that kind of.
Oh, yes.
And if you want to talk
100%.
about why our state is the way it is, it's at Washington and Oak. What are we going to do as Republicans? I mean, do we have the courage? Do we have the courage to start to look at these issues? And my comment is relative to the frustration that you're feeling when you read your ex feedback. We're not courageously moving into the issues that could actually change the state permanently. You know, I had Pam Altendorf on here, and I started saying things about the teachers union, and she just shut me down. Don't be talking about our teachers now. Don't do that. And I'm going, well, Pam, okay, great. I'll stop because you're a guest here on the podcast that I'm not going to, drag you through the tumbleweed on this. But my point is it's who teaches the children and what they're teaching them. An old Secretary of Education Bennett line, who's teaching the children and what they're teaching them. In our university, Marxists are teaching my children. So what are we going to do about that? Are we going to, because you guys hold the purse strings. And then the one thing that happened that pissed me off, the only thing that really pissed me off was those regents.
Yes.
I mean, the most important thing to me is now in the hands of Governor Walz exclusively.
Yep.
Right? I've set you up. Go, please.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot there, but I'll start where you ended with the University of Minnesota. So, we control the purse strings to an extent. At the same time, we don't, because there are those regents, right? And then it's kind of its own separate little sub-governmental entity that is very autonomous. And that's why you have that board of regents. It's very, very telling that just because we have a tie in the House and therefore could have any influence whatsoever over who the next regents are, that they decided to pull this stunt of not doing the job and kicking it over to Tim Walz. What that tells me is that they are terrified of one not like a conservative firebrand, but just like a normal, responsible person getting on that regent board and asking the simplest of questions. That terrifies them because, as you say, that place is the center of gravity of grift, public grift in this state. You have people there making, I think the gal at the top makes almost $1 billion a year.
$1 billion? Oh, you mean $1 million?
$1 million. Sorry. You're right. Almost $1 million a year.
Like Dr. Evil.
Yeah. Billion. No, she makes almost $1 million a year. It's like 900 and it's like the $9.99, like right. It's not 10, it's $9.99. She makes almost $1 million. And it gets ridiculous from there down too, in terms of like the number of people, like you say, who are 2,000 that are making more
according
than
to Marion Rurick.
And I trust her analysis on that. She's the same one who called out Second Harvest Heartland's CEO making $700,000+.
And let me say something. I've been very respectful with Marion Rurick, and the same people that ride you ride her.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never ever said anything. I've just said, Marion, you pulled the Band-Aid off. Could you please go farther now? I mean, it's not enough to say here. Keep because what I'm going to say to you when you go back in the session, if you take a look at the roster of who's teaching out there and where they come from, and you take a look at the University of Minnesota and policy nationally, we're going to understand how important Minnesota is to the leftist project internationally. It's the think tank. And I'm going to tell you, and I said this a lot, and you've never heard me say it, I was actually in the room in 1969 with a group of academics who plotted to take this state communist. I was in the room. I was a child. I was just there by accident, but I was in the room, and they made a 50-year plan, and it's been about 50 years, and look where we're at. Now, we're making a comeback here nationally, and it is because of Donald Trump. Let's just be clear, Alex Plekish. It's not MnGOP, in my opinion. When I personally opine, I like to say it's an opinion. I don't think it's been the effort of the BPOUs in MnGOP that has turned the state a little bit more red over the last 10 years. I think it's Donald Trump. I think he's galvanized Minnesota citizens. And what I also see is a big effort to repress those citizens in the party. These are the problems that I want to bring to you to think about, because when I say the tent's not very big, hey, I'm there. I know it's not very big. I know the efforts that are being made to marginalize the so-called MAGA people in the party and in the state. And I'm telling you, they're not going away. And so what I'm trying to share with you is a growing gap, which is now exacerbated by the Israel issue. And as a elected representative, and I have the same goal. You said last time here, it's about having the power to make change. Let's not shoot ourselves in the foot on the way to the forum, because we do have the wind in our sails so far. Seems like we do. What are we going to do here in Minnesota to continue to grow our base, continue to grow our brand? And, what are we going to do?
Well, there has to be a commitment to the mission, right? So you keep bringing up this idea of the big tent, and I think and you've talked about excluding people feeling excluded. I think there's a certain degree of self-exclusion that takes place, because when you come in with the desire to displace, you can't be surprised when the people you're trying to displace push back against you. If you're coming in to help, if you're coming in to grow, as you say, if you're coming in to expand the number of seats that we have in elected office, fantastic. I don't care where you are on foreign policy, or what part of the spectrum that we broadly consider to be conservative you land on. If you can if you're here on mission to get Republicans elected, we can debate policy when it comes time to debate policy, which is going to be in session with bills, in conversations like this, whatever the case may be. But if the goal is, I'm coming into the party with this perspective in order to make sure that these people over here get pushed out, that's not going to be welcomed. And I think that's the major difference. I mean, you talk about people being excluded.
Oh, I want to just let me stop you, because I joined the party in 2020 after that election.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know any of this was going on. Okay, I came in completely naive to serve the party. I was not aware of none of it. I was naive in the extreme. I thought everybody was just going to get together, kumbaya.
Yeah.
Very silly of me. And I started a thing here in CD3 called the Master Classes. And I went to Randy Sutter, who was the chair of CD3 at the time, and I got his blessing. And he ignored me. I just said, I want to do this. I was actually pushed by the executive chair of the old SD42, guy named Dave Kylo. He said, you got to go get this approved at CD3. I said, I'm not going to do that. I don't have to do that. He said, yes, you do, because he was loyal to the party and to the party process. He felt he had a fiduciary responsibility to the party structure. So I listened to him because I was on his board. I went to CD3, got the approval, started doing it. And within about 2 or 3 classes, we started having a lot of people coming. And then Randy Sutter showed up and he shut it down. And I said, Randy, why are you shutting this down? I don't get it. And he said, why are you doing it? I said, I'm trying to get more Republicans. I'm trying to outreach to the community and bring people in and bring them together. And I was not strident at the time. Trust me, I was really just trying to serve the party. In other words, I didn't come in with the idea of expelling people. And here's what Sutter told me. He goes, you're doing this to bring in more new Republicans. I said, yes. He said, we don't need more Republicans. We need more work from the Republicans we already have. And it took me a year to figure out what he was talking about. David Hand sent the message. You're bringing people together from different districts? Don't do that. We don't want these people to mix. See, that's when I came in. When I went to my first state central committee, I didn't know anybody, and I couldn't meet it. Now everybody knows everybody. Now everybody is networked together. There is a statewide network of activists that know each other. We don't all like each other, but we know who each other are. Part of that is X. Part of that is just doing the grassroots politicking of going to dinner with people and getting to know them. The thing has changed. It's really changed a lot. I don't want to say I changed it, but I was there during that process of change. So I want to take issue with what you said, at least in my own case. And for all the Republican Party officers who are going to be listening to me, I wasn't Professor Penn at that time. I was David Penn, American citizen, wanting to serve by Republican Party because I wanted to elect more Republicans. And I got hammered for that because I don't even know why. I mean, I wasn't even MAGA. I mean, I was just saying, look at this history. Look at this. Why is this? Let's talk. And they didn't want that conversation, at least in CD3. They didn't want it. So I am very, and I was on a board with Alex Plekish, and I call Randy Sutter, Mr. We don't want any more Republicans. And I tried to do the same thing. I was on a board with Alex, and he said, we don't talk about politics here. And everybody looked at him. We're all in this because of politics. He says, no, we don't do that here. I call him Mr. We don't do that here. These people suppressed my impulse to do politics, and that made me no longer in the bell curve. I went out to the extreme. So when I say that there is a process like that, there is. Now, I'm not to the extreme of what we saw, but there are people that find me very reprehensible. There'll be people that criticize you for even coming on here.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm totally reasonable. So I know these people are not reasonable because I am reasonable. And I want a cohesive party that elects Republicans. I want bold and vigorous debate up until the endorsement. And then we're going to get behind the endorsement. Oh, we ruined that process. So now we've got a mess. So I'm going to say to you and ask you, chart me in the minutes that are left, a course. Is there a course out of this mess? Or now that we've gotten into camps, do we just slug it out until one side wins and one side loses?
I've had this conversation with a lot of people at various levels with various degrees of insider knowledge, everything from the most grassroots of grassroots activists to the most institutional of established figures. And the consensus seems to be that we're a mess and that it is not fixable without the emergence of a centralizing figure. So you say, are we going to have to just punch it out? Yeah. We're going to have to punch it out until
a champion emerges.
You got it. It's going to have, there has to be a movement. You credited Donald Trump with the success that we've seen in recent years. I would agree.
Thank you.
Well, I mean,
thank you very much. That's great.
And that some version of that needs to happen downstream here in Minnesota, because what the Democrats have, this infrastructure, this apparatus, this well-oiled machine, the way the funding comes, the big donors, the unions, the non-NGOs, the nonprofit industrial
the university,
complex, they've got so much going for
media,
them, and it's all very centrally controlled. Like, they have issues keeping their tribe together, especially the more ideologically crazy ones, who can cause a lot of trouble. They did during the session on the Democrat side. But at the end of the day, they have certain people in certain places who can say, cut it out, shut up, we're doing this, get on board, or you're gone. Because they have that level of hierarchy established. We don't. I can do basically whatever I want, right? Like, I could come on Professor Penn's podcast and somebody
and thank you for coming on.
Well,
good to see you, Walter.
There's nobody in the caucus or at the party or in my BPO. Nobody's going to come to me and be like, you better not go on that podcast again. There's nobody who has that level of influence. And it's not because I'm this, really brave to defy them. It's that there's nothing to defy. They don't have any authority. And so we're just there's no person in this apparatus, perhaps Tom Emmer, if he wanted to be, he could descend from on high and exert his
Well,
influence.
the implication is or the rumor is, or when you look on X, when I talk to the so-called MAGA movement people, they say that he has descended from on high. I don't know. I'm just sharing that is the rumor that he's running things. I don't know if that's true. I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying that it is true. I don't have any 8x10 glossies, but I do know there is a coordinated effort by people to hassle me, and I believe that Bobby Benson is involved in that. I just do from what happens to me on X, because he pops up in conversations with people that he shouldn't be there. And I immediately said, wow, I went right to Tom Emmer. I said, Tom, look at this guy who's working for you, blow ballast and come up to the surface. I don't wish any of these people any harm. I've invited Tom Emmer on this podcast. I'm doing it again today. I've met him. I've talked to him. I think he's a sensational politician. But this is part of us finding a champion. And I think if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying we don't have it could be Tom Emmer, but I don't think that's going to work. And I'm going to tell you why. He's got a lot of people don't like him in this state. A lot, really a lot. We need a new person to emerge that can bring everybody together. If I'm hearing you correctly, that's what you're saying. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Because what needs to happen is, so let me paint the perfect picture. All right.
All right, great.
Okay. Let's call this person candidate X, our champion.
Okay.
Right. Whoever that person is and whatever their background is, wherever they come from, what needs to happen is they need to secure. First of all, there needs to be all sorts of things that time out right, in terms of like the environment and the iron being hot enough to strike. Then they need to emerge in such a way that it gets the attention of national figures. So ideally, you would have somebody, because remember, we're talking about Tim Walz here, right? And this also assumes that Tim Walz runs. So Walz runs for a third term, viable candidate emerges, broadly liked, gets the attention of Trump, probably via Emmer, because Trump and Emmer have a very strong relationship. And Trump has an abiding interest in humiliating Tim Walz. So if the political fundamentals make sense, Minnesota's never going to be a first-tier gubernatorial race going into 2026, but it could be high on top of the list of the second tier. And if it hits that level, and the fact that it's Walz that we're talking about, and there's personal animosity there with Trump, and you've got the Trump-Emmer connection, if all these planets align, you could have a scenario where that candidate obtains a level of support that enables them to be the center of gravity that brings all these disparate parts of the party together. If that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And you're saying that you're seeing it as a statewide gubernatorial candidate would be the best suited because they stay in the state and they become the arbiter of things that are happening in Beltrami County.
Yes.
I mean, that person has the juice to really move the needle throughout the entire state.
Right. The reason there hasn't been, because we don't have statewide office holders, we don't have anybody in this U.S. Senate, we don't have anybody in the constitutional offices. Whoever that person would be, by default, would be the leader of the party. Just like Trump is by default the leader of the Republican Party nationally. Like, he doesn't literally hold that title, but for all intents and purposes, it's his party. Okay. I've had conversations with people who have been considering running for this, that, or the other thing, who have had to deal with folks in Washington as they consider whatever decision they're going to make. And it has been made very clear to them that you're either with Trump or you're out. Like, Trump owns the party. And so that's the way it works. You don't have to like it. You can call it anti-democratic. You can say, oh, I don't like that process.
Politics.
But that's politics. Tim Walz owns the Democratic Party here in Minnesota. Whoever this person is, what it comes down to is they have to get elected. if they can summon the juice to get elected, that person owns the Republican Party of Minnesota going forward. And so you better hope it's a good person who has good character and has a forward-thinking, future orientation to make things better for the state. Because that's the danger, right? That's the danger of having kings. You can have good kings and you can have bad kings. You can have righteous kings, you can have evil kings, but you're going to have a king. That's it. Within the context of a political party, that's how it's going to work.
Well, we're a democratic republic, and within that context, that's the way of taking kingship and making the people involved in the choosing of the king. I mean, it's really quite evolutionary if you think about it from a political perspective. We can have a great king. We'd all love a great king. It's his son, Rudrick, that we're afraid of, right?
Yeah.
We don't have that problem in an elective political system. Well, that's very interesting, Walter, because I'm looking at who's showing up that they want to run. Somebody's going to have to develop that charisma, that power. Part of that is that, this is my belief, some of that power can be imbued upon them in ways that is not linear.
Right.
And we're waiting to see. And like you're saying, the iron has to be right. Waltz he's wounded. You're right. Trump has an interest in humiliating him. Emmer does have that ability to call Trump. And so there is, the constituent elements are there. They are there. That's interesting. Okay. So what I'm hearing you say is, for me as a political activist, I better find my champion for governor and help that guy get elected. That would be the way to do it. That would be one way to do it, to coalesce the party.
I think ultimately it's the only way to do it. I think the thinking
from where we are right now is a broken party.
Right. I think the thinking has been largely backwards. And my thinking on this was largely backwards, where I used to think we need to get the party in order to elect somebody statewide. Now I'm thinking we need to elect somebody statewide in order to get the party in order, right? Like there needs to be something to coalesce around. And right now we don't have that. Yeah, we've got the legislature, but the legislature, the caucuses, and part of the reason why there's this tension between the House Republican caucus, the Senate Victory Fund, all these different organs, and the grassroots party members in the MNGOP, is because they exist in different political realities. Okay, the caucus has to be focused on obtaining and keeping the majority, which translates to being focused in swing districts, trying to pick up pieces on the board here and there and there. That effort is never going to be a statewide effort. So you can't turn to the caucus to fix this problem in either the House or the Senate. And frankly, they shouldn't be tasked with fixing the problem because it's not their problem. They've got their own thing that they have to worry about, which is maintaining majorities in the legislature or obtaining them in the first place. So there is nobody in a position of prominence who can serve as that political center of gravity that brings all these disparate units together and says, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to move forward. This is the message. And without that, I don't know how you create a coalition without something at the center to coalesce around.
That's a very good point. I mean, based on where we're at today.
Right.
Because within the party, ad hominem is the way we're doing business right now. And that goes for both sides. And it's not helpful. And I think it's very honest for you to come in and say these two factions are at odds. And I'm trying to add something for you to think about, because now we've thrown the Israel thing into the mix, which I think is further polarizing and fracturing. And I'm going to start to talk about this a lot on the podcast. So I'm going to think about what you're saying. I mean, it's really about how are we going to coalesce? Because I think it's very critical that we win in Minnesota. I don't think Minnesota Republicans, except for very few of them, like Rudy Boschwitz or Vin Weber or Tom Emmer, I don't think Minnesota Republicans really realize how important Minnesota is to the Democratic effort and to the globalist effort and how important the University of Minnesota is. So since we're running over, I just want to say as a constituent, as a Minnesota citizen, whatever you all can do to get some courage to start going into that University of Minnesota, and I realize it's its own thing, and it's got its own program, it's got federal funding. Trump is after these universities, and he is moving the needle, and he is using the money to alter the curriculum. Why can't we do this at the state level?
Let me ask you this. So, Elliot Ingen, who's
Yes.
a colleague of mine,
Yeah.
he had this idea to tax the endowment of the university in order to fund, I forget what it was going to fund, but basically the idea was that providing some sort of mechanism for accountability for them that we could kind of tug on when they're out of line. The conventional wisdom was, well, we can't do that because we said that we're not going to raise taxes. What do you think?
I think that Minnesota parents look forward to seeing their children go to the University of Minnesota as a gateway to an economically blessed life, that there's a lot of respect for the university, that's institutional, it's part of our culture. And I don't think Minnesotans really understand what's going on out there. And we have an educational problem. And then they go, well, who's going to run out there and start telling the truth? That person's career could come to an end. See, we're trapped a little bit in the political realities of elective politics. It takes a lot of courage to take on an institution which has broad-based support among the electorate, even if that institution is foul in many different ways. And it does do these great public services at the same time.
Right.
It's complex, but it's like the NGOs. Nobody talked about that 4 years ago. Now we're talking about it all the time. Are we going to continue to work on that? Or is that just, we've had our sacrificial lamb and now we're going to go back to business as usual? See, what I think that the movement that I'm part of wants is continuous progress towards a more well-being society, not some examples, and then we're all going to go. A lot of times, they'll arrest people and imprison them. It's not really about changing anything. It's like Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff went to jail. He's talking about Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party. Bernie Madoff was the perfect fall guy. Perfect fall guy for that deal. Nobody else went to jail. Nobody else. He was a patsy for the whole program that went on. Nobody else, all that money disappeared, and they laid it on him. And, as a Jewish person, I'll say blame it on the Jews. And that was the end of it, okay? And nobody else went to jail. Well, we've got this situation now here where we've had a very prominent group of people, all part of an ethnic group that is, being derided, and people are going to jail, and it's a huge scandal. What about all the other scandals? There's scandals everywhere. I have citizens coming to me because of my role, bringing me evidence of fraud, like I'm going to be able to do something about it. And I'm not in a position to do anything about it. I could give it to you. What can you do about it? I know a person down in Chanhassen who has good evidence of fraud. He's frustrated, and he's been stiffed down there in CD6, and he's pissed at Nash. He's pissed at you. He's pissed at everybody.
I know who you're talking
Yeah, but he, I've met with him because he came to me. You probably do know about him. This is a citizen who has a grievance. Okay, to end the podcast, when citizens who are what we would call normies, I think that's why we ended up having this podcast, the concept of what is a normie.
Yeah.
This guy is a normie, but he got stiffed by the system and it moved him to the periphery. When the system responds to people, when it's really people-centered, we're going to have less political violence. When the system becomes a system of life and love, we have to actually ensue that. And you see that from how I interact with you. It's not words. You got to live it. You're trying to live it, and I'm trying to live it. We need more people actually concerned. This particular guy needs somebody to talk to him.
Well, if it's the guy that I'm thinking of, he missed that opportunity by the method of which he solicited attention. He crossed a line, and he's done it with more than one person.
Oh, he's crossing the line with everybody. I'm saying this is what moves people from the center. But at the point of attack, it could have been handled differently. I'm not here to comment right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm just saying at the point of attack, when the problem happened, his grievance was not properly addressed or adjudicated. It moved him into a position of relative militancy. Well, we're seeing that throughout the society because government can only be so responsive. I just want it to be more responsive.
Absolutely.
Right?
The problem is that, so you say, like, if you got evidence of fraud, it should go to law enforcement, right? You should be able to take it to, in a world where we actually had a decent attorney general, you could take it to the attorney general, right? Take it to the BCA, take it to a federal investigative authority, U.S. attorney, DOJ. The problem is that everything locally here in Minnesota is currently controlled by the very people who are probably committing the fraud.
Right. And that, to end the podcast, is why you're running into stridency, because I think you're a good guy. I mean, you're trying to find your way through this. The citizens want this mafia broken down. So here's what I'm going to say in closing. There's two ways to go about it: incrementally or with more full-throated support of certain ideas. The issue is, do people get elected if they take this on full tilt, like the university? If the Republicans took on the university, what would be the implications? Well, you'd be called cretins and against education and against cancer research, and you're going to kill children, and all this stuff would go on. We're afraid of that. And I get it. I'm afraid of it. I mean, there's a lot of good things that go on at the university. There's a lot of bad things that go on there. Will we have the courage as a party to attack this thing? And I think why you're seeing that stridency, applied to you is people want more confrontation of that cabal of people that are controlling things here, and they're not happy with the outcomes. So I don't have an answer to how you're going to do it, how anybody's going to do it. I'm just telling you, from my viewpoint, I think the desire is for more confrontation, which is, within the context of these assassinations, is exactly the opposite of what the very people that are titular heads of the party said we need to do. We need to be better than this. We need to get along. So this is why there is this problem, and that kind of brings the whole podcast full circle. And I'm going to say it again. For me, I thought the assassinations were used to breed hands across the water and bipartisanship. And what many of the citizens want is confrontation and change. And for whatever that's worth to you, I'm just sharing it with you.
I think I'm glad you put it that way at the very end, because I think the emphasis is on the change. I got a friend, buddy of mine for many, many years, going back to middle school. We were the best men in each other's weddings. He's got no time for theatrical confrontation. Like, he watches these congressional hearings where they're dressing down walls or they're railing into somebody for whatever.
Theater.
Yeah. And it's just, call me when somebody's arrested. Like, I don't care. Like, I don't want any more investigations. I don't want any more hearings. And so when I hear people say they want confrontation, the one thing I don't want to do is kabuki theater. Now, I've done some of that, but it's usually been informed by passion in the moment. Like, I actually care about not butchering kids, right? But what really matters at the end of the day is the ability to actually change it. We don't currently have that ability.
We need more Republicans.
Yeah.
We need that coalescing figure that can bring the people together.
Yes.
Okay, well, we're going to pray for that.
All right.
I'm going to pray for it. It's great that you came back. You're always welcome here. You surprised me when you said you wanted to come back on, but I want you to know, I personally always welcome you and any of your colleagues here.
Sure.
You can send a parade of your colleagues here. It would help. One of the things that could coalesce things, because a lot of people that listen to me are outside the bell curve.
Yeah.
And it's great when we come in and have a an informed conversation, because that's good modeling of behavior for everybody. We're modeling a good human political interaction, I think.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad. I mean, I don't anticipate a future where I will ever not be willing to have a conversation. So, don't never feel that way. Never feel like, oh, I guess he won't talk to me now. Like I don't see that happen.
Well, that's great, because I really enjoyed developing this relationship with you. But no, tell your colleagues to come here. I mean, I'm talking to several of them. I try to bring them in. It takes a little courage, because you know who's watching.
Yeah.
But those are the people we want to talk to. If we're going to coalesce the movement, we're going to have to talk to each other. And on that note, Walter, thanks for coming in. Tanner, thank you very much.
Of course.
We'll see you soon again.
See ya.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.